Thanks a lot for coming. It's really terrific that I'm following Leslie, because I'm also going to talk a little bit about culture and the importance of what we do, not just as technology, but as an influence on our entire civilization. So I'm going to start with the corporate world. I gave a talk at Fidelity Investments back in 2008, and during the Q&A, one of the executives said something that stuck with me, and I've thought about it ever since. He said, "We know about all these new technologies. What we don't know is how to organize ourselves to use them effectively." Think about that for a minute. You know, open source is not just a technology. It was actually a new way of human organization. And we've been exploring the ideas that began with open source over the last 20 years. How do people work together over networks? How do they cooperate when they don't know each other? How can we actually create shared artifacts and systems that allow us to share? This great line that I wanted just to bring up that was in Eric Raymond's original Cathedral and Bazaar essay, back in 1997. He talked about Brooks and the Mythical Man Month, and then he contrasted it with a book by Gerald Weinberg called The Psychology of Computer Programming, and he says, it supplied what in hindsight we can see as a vital correction to Brooks. Weinberg observed that in shops where developers are not territorial about their code and encourage other people to look for bugs and potential improvements, improvement happens dramatically faster than elsewhere. So there was this cultural mind shift. And of course, we made a lot of progress on that. You know, we now have Microsoft on GitHub and the White House. So we kind of have made a lot of progress on that. We also have made some degree of progress on this other fundamental promise of open source, which is the promise of reciprocity and a kind of generosity. I remember asking Larry Wall why he gave away, Patch and RN and Perl back in the early days. And he said, well, I had gotten all this great stuff off the internet for free, and so I thought I should give something back. And that notion of giving something back was always central to our community. And we certainly still have that, but I think that notion that we have an obligation to give back is somewhat attenuated in the era of Silicon Valley success stories, where it's like, how much can I get for myself? And it's certainly attenuated in the era of Wall Street, where people are there like, well, do I have an obligation to society as a whole? No, I just have to basically do well for myself. And I think we really have to remember that wonderful social imperative of open source, which is a culture of sharing because we got so much from others. So I also, when he asked that question, I also thought about the transformation of Amazon. You know, Amazon was originally an application, and back around 2002 and 2003, Jeff got this idea that he wanted to turn Amazon into a platform. And if you hear the stories from inside Amazon, it was quite a remarkable business transformation. And it was partly technologically. Steve Yegi wrote about this in a leaked memo. Actually, it was a Google Plus post that went public instead of just inside Google. And he contrasted Google and Amazon. And he kind of wrote about Jeff's mandate. He said it went something along these lines. All teams will henceforth expose their data and functionalities through service interfaces. Teams must communicate with each other through these interfaces. There will be no other form of IPC allowed. Doesn't matter what technology you use, but all service interfaces without exception must be designed from the ground up to be externalizable. The team must plan and design to be able to expose the interface to developers in the outside world. Anyone who doesn't do this will be fired. I mean, that's gutsy, and it worked. But it was also coupled with kind of like a corporate reorganization of Amazon into teams, so that the actual organization of the company kind of matched the service-oriented organization of the software itself. And that, I thought, was a really interesting cultural point. But there's more than that, because that was also part of a transformation that we now think of as DevOps. And what's sort of interesting is increasingly people are understanding something about DevOps that wasn't always clear. And Jeff Sussner wrote about in a post recently called Empathy, the Essence of DevOps. It's not about making developers and sysadmins report to the same VP. It's not about automating all your configuration procedures. It's not about tipping up a Jenkins server or running your applications in the cloud or releasing your code on GitHub. It's not even about letting your developers deploy their code to a platform as a service. The true essence of DevOps is empathy. What does he mean by that? I think it'll become clear as I go on. I want to also highlight something that Mark Burgess wrote. He talks about DevOps in the context of something called Promis Theory, which is the idea that if you actually allow the people who are building things to make promises to each other, they have a better chance of keeping them. It's not that all promises will be kept. Humans break their promises all the time. Machines just break. But with Promis Theory, agents are aware of the commitments they're making, and their promises are more likely to reflect what they're capable of performing. He said, well-formed network of promises includes contingencies. But the key point is estimates were made with accurate information by the agent responsible, not by external wishful thinkers without a clue. You'll see why this is important to me in a moment, because I've been thinking a lot about the Healthcare.gov rescue. Right? It was this team of engineers came in and rescued this colossal disaster of a site. And we think, God, these guys came from Google, right? They came in and they worked their tech magic. I think it was a little bit of that, but a huge amount of the work was debugging the human failures at the heart of Healthcare.gov. The communications that led the contractors to build software components that didn't actually work together. It was a cultural failure that led to the breakdown of that, humongously expensive and incredibly important software program. So Mikey Dickerson, one of the Google site reliability engineers who was part of the rescue team, worked 18-hour days for 100 days straight. And a lot of what he did was stand-up meetings focused on why people weren't able to keep the promises that they made to each other. It'd be things like, you said you were going to stand up these new servers. Why didn't you? Well, I didn't get the security clearance. Well, why didn't you get the security clearance? Well, Jeff didn't give it to me. Jeff, why didn't you give him the security clearance? I never got the ticket. Figuring out, these two guys were using different ticketing systems. Crazy shit like that. Just nobody had ever thought about this as a human system where we had to figure out how to get the humans to cooperate on this massive project in a better way. And of course, so what they really found out was that Healthcare.gov was designed and delivered by a system that doesn't allow developers to make promises to each other, or to operations engineers, or to end users. All the promises were from policymakers and politicians to other policymakers and politicians, and then they handed down some big steaming pile from on high through hard-coded specifications and waterfall project management. And so what the rescue team had to bring was not technology, but a cultural revolution. Something that said communications is a priority, figuring out how to build stuff that actually works, measuring what works. And there's actually a great book about this DevOps revolution. It's kind of a novelized version of, effectively, the Healthcare.gov rescue called The Phoenix Project. You should read it. It sort of was like, whoa, this is exactly what happened. But there's a really important point I want to go on to. Ezra Klein wrote a really important piece about Healthcare.gov. And he talked about the failure, not of Healthcare.gov, but of so much of government software. And he said, one privilege we have is to excuse the terrible quality of services the government routinely delivers to the poor. We just ignore it. And so I want to talk a little bit about food stamps. I recently heard a marketplace segment, and it had a really eye-opening statistic. For the libertarians among you, think on this. A huge proportion of food stamp spending happens at stores like Walmart at midnight. At midnight. Why at midnight? Because people are hungry, and their food stamp cards get automatically refilled at midnight. And on that day, something like 30 or 40% of all the money gets spent, right? Because people are hungry. You don't go shopping at midnight, unless it's really important. So it really matters when there's a bureaucratic snafu and your food stamp card doesn't work. And that's a project that we worked on at Code for America in San Francisco last year with the Human Services Agency. Turns out it's a huge amount of churn in the system, people falling off the rolls, getting to the front of the line at that Walmart and finding that their card doesn't work because they couldn't follow the instructions that came in a legal letter that nobody could understand. So what the Code for America team built was actually a simple app that simply says there's a problem with your benefits, call the office. Because nobody had actually ever debugged the human side, gone through the process of trying to comply. So Jake Solomon, who's one of the fellows who worked on this project, wrote an amazing post called People, Not Data. And he talked about user needs. He talked about an empathetic service grounded in the concrete needs of concrete people. It's not about innovation, big data, government as a platform, transparency, crowdfunding, open data, or civic tech. It's about people, learning to prioritize people and their needs. And so, it's one of the reasons why, for me, one of the most important documents for any developer today is this UK Government Digital Service Design Principles document. Go look it up. It's got this fabulous idea about how you start with needs, how you do less, you design with data, you make it simple, make things open. But it's really about putting users at the center. And we have a lot of that in Silicon Valley. There's this whole growth hacking movement, for example. We're going to measure our users and we're going to see what they do. But it's without a soul. It could be we're going to measure users and then rip them off. And the point is, no, we want to measure users to make things better for them. And, so anyway, that's just a really important thing. We have got to think about how we make things work for users. Anyway, there's a lot of technology today that I think is going to drive other kinds of cultural change. You look at Uber and Airbnb and Bitcoin and a whole lot of other things. We're pressing the system. And it's really important as we press the system to do it with values and do it driven by our values. There's a cult of disruption in Silicon Valley, and that's not the point. We're trying to make the world better. There's this great quote by Aaron Levy of Box.net that he wrote about Uber. He said, Uber is a $3.5 billion lesson in building for how the world should work instead of optimizing for how the world does work. Now, he was talking about the insights of how you could apply technology to rethink, taxis and that kind of transportation. But it's also a really important lesson for all of us who are building applications for the future. What kind of world do we want to build? What kind of world do we want to build? And I kind of want to leave you, in a way, with this wonderful piece that I remember from Jack Handey of Deep Thought's fame. And I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, what would we say if aliens came down and said, show us your civilization? We'd say, this isn't really our civilization. This is just something we're playing around with. Come back in 20 years and we'll show you our real civilization. Well, we should get working on our real civilization now. We're in a period of immense transformation where the internet is enabling us to build something better. And I want to urge all of you, when you think about what's possible with technology, think about how you're going to use it to build a better world that works the way it should work, with people at the center instead of profit or technology. It's all about making it work for all of us. And that was the original vision of open source, and it should still be the vision that's the heart of technology. It's a social movement as well as a technology movement. Make it happen. Thank you.